Okay, hello and welcome to the Western Region IR4 research training session. And today we're going to talk about drip applications. And I've asked a couple of our seasoned veteran field researchers, Julie Coughlin and David Ennis, to join us for this session, and Mika Tolson from UC Davis. And I'm Stephen Flanagan, and I work with the program out of UC Davis, and today we're going to talk about the ins and outs of these more complex applications. So with that brief intro, David, why don't you say hi and give us a little bit about Kearney.
Hello, my name is David Ennis. I work with the IR4 program at UC Kearney in Parlier, California. We work with a wide range of row crops and tree crops.
Great, thanks, David. And Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Coughlin. I'm an IR4 Field Research Director at the University of Hawaii. And I work with a range of tropical crops, mostly papaya, banana, pineapple, coffee. We do a lot of coffee work, so yeah.
Okay, great. And Mika.
Hi, I'm Mika Tolson. I'm the Assistant Regional Field Coordinator in the Western region of IR4. I work with Stephen and Becky to help manage all the field trials in the West.
Great. Okay, so those are the players, and just to give you an idea of the geography, David is down near between Fresno and Visalia at the Kearney station. Mika is up at UC Davis, and Julie is somewhere in Hawaii. I think that arrow is actually where you did the experiment, right?
Right.
But you're actually closer down by Honolulu at the moment, right?
Right.
All right.
Correct.
Okay, so anyway, what we're going to do is talk about two really different studies. One in seed corn for imidacloprid, and then the other is for oxythiopyprelin on strawberry. So we're going to look at an insecticide and a fungicide, and these are actually really kind of different studies that both had an injection application, but they're actually very different in terms of the uses, in terms of the active ingredients. So I threw this one in here just so that everyone would know that it's not always surfing in Hawaii, right, Julie?
Not always, no.
How much did this boom weigh?
It was heavy. You know, this is James and Mike. I have them labeled there, but this was kind of Mike's creation in his mind, and James and Mike put it together. It's our low-tech high boy. So,
yeah, exactly.
And it's really heavy. I only participated in one application, and it is very heavy. It's a guy's job for sure.
But one of the things that's comparable in both of these studies is that they all had a foliar application and some sort of a drip application. So yours was just challenging because you had to get that spray up over field corn. So kudos, and that looks like a very hot job.
Yeah.
And those suits.
Okay, so I made reference to the fact that there's some similarities in these two studies, but there's also some real differences. The similarity is that they both had these two different types of applications, but the dissimilarities are that one was a fungicide and the other was an insecticide. And on the strawberry study, really it was a application that was relevant to kind of all strawberries that are grown anywhere where they have foliar disease problems. But the corn study is really very specific to Hawaii. And Julie, why don't you talk a little bit about why is it that there's seed corn production on Hawaii? What is it that Pioneer does there?
They grow the parent seed for seed corn, and we have a year-round growing season, and so the seed companies do a lot of work here. And this particular trial was actually for Admire Pro insecticide that is already registered in seed corn. They were already able to use it, but they wanted to remove the food and feed restrictions from the label because after they deliver their seed to the mainland, the excess seed, they wanted to put it in silos but they had to separate out the corn seed that was treated with a Meyer Pro. And this is very costly for them, for their operations. So it was a very important project for the industry. And they were very, very cooperative with the trials and helping us accomplish the things we needed to accomplish for the providing fields and everything.
It's another great example of where it's a very unique project where we have to do this work just to make something more useful, right? It's not even that it wasn't registered, it was that we had to make sure to remove this feeding restriction. So it's an interesting and unique kind of way that IR4 helps growers. So. Cool. Okay, so that's just some general background on the studies. And this is kind of the outline for the discussion today. We're going to talk about the protocol, equipment choices, how to verify the output of the system, some of the mix calculation details, and then we're going to go through kind of the application confirmation part of the piece. Okay, so Julie, why don't you talk a little bit about this? This was the system that you started with, the SureFlow pump. What were the challenges that you encountered when you were using this system?
Well, this system, this was our first field trial. We had four field trials over 2 years, and the first plots that were planted were quite large because the grower was concerned that we wouldn't get crop in our control plots without a Meyer Pro on it. So we wanted to use a smaller system that we subsequently used in the other fields, but when we tried it on this setup, the backflow pressure from the system was too high, and so we couldn't use it. So we needed a different, larger setup. So we stole that from our ATV sprayer, the tank, took it off and rigged this up to inject into their lines. And it worked okay. It was all right, except when the tank started to get really low, we had cavitations, so the output delivery was not as consistent.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't as precise as I would be comfortable with in a GLP application. I kind of wanted to improve it after, because we wanted the test substance to go on the plot consistently over time, and it was just it was mostly variable at the end. And then we rinsed the tank and everything, so all of the test substance actually got on the plot, but it was a little tricky.
Okay, great. And we're going to look at a couple different systems here, and then we can talk about some pros and cons on them. This is actually a picture of Nathan Leach down in India. He had the same study that David had, and this was on strawberries for the Orundus fungicide. And so this is the protocol details in terms of actually from section 15 of the protocol, and highlighted there is the chemigation portions of the treatments that had to be made.
So Julie, on this particular trial, and you've got 2 treated plots with 2 soil-directed applications. Did you use the same system on both plots?
Yes, at each site, yes.
And this was a case where the protocol actually was pretty clear that you could use either one. You could use soil-directed or chemigation, but chemigation was really what the growers were using, right?
Oh wait, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I use chemigation for all the plots.
Yeah.
I just use different equipment. That's, yeah.
Right.
I didn't do a drench, a soil-directed drench.
And that's consistent with what the growers do, right? It wasn't
yes.
that they weren't applying a soil, yeah.
Correct.
Through the water. Okay. And one of the things you'll notice is that there's a requirement here over there on the spray volume range, 30 to 200 mil solution per plant. And we'll come back to that because that actually generated a deviation because that wasn't exactly how it was done in the field commercially. So we'll cover that as we go a little bit further. Okay, and then this is the study that David, you did, and so you could have done this as a soil directed as well, right?
Yes, could have, yeah. It's easier to do the drip though, so we went with the easy way.
Sure, why not? I mean, it's more complicated actually because you have to have the system. But and one of the other things I noticed that was different in this protocol is that it really specifically specified this quarter to half acre inch of water, whereas Julie's protocol, it was mils per plant, but it wasn't actually talking about more the irrigation volume. So it's there's nuances, and you have to pay attention to not only the active but the water portion of the protocol requirements.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about equipment choices. So in the Riverside example, they actually used a tractor. David we'll take a look at his Mozzie injector. And then we talked a little bit already about Hawaii's choice between this SureFlow and MasterFlex pump. So let's just take a look at some of the equipment that was used. So this was down in Riverside, and I think practically one of the things that makes a lot of sense with this system is this field station doesn't have very much, what I want to say, it doesn't have, all it is a shop and then fields. So there's no electricity anywhere out on this site. And I thought that the use of a tractor and the PTO pump makes a lot of sense where you have no other infrastructure in terms of having a system that you can plug into for electricity or something. But then Julie, you had to use your own batteries, right, for your system?
Right. We used a 12-volt battery.
Yeah. So that must have been a situation where you didn't have electricity either, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But this system works really well. It's just a different way of pressurizing into the drip system. David, why don't you talk a little bit about how this Mozzie injector works?
Yeah, the Mozzie just works off of suction from your main irrigation line. So you divert the irrigation water to run through the mazes, and then as it does that, it creates a suction, and you can mix a solution in some kind of a container, and it will just siphon out of that container and go directly into the irrigation line.
And you have to, can you guys see the mouse on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically you're opening and closing these valves to get that right amount of flow, right? You
adjust those to a point where you start to siphon out of the container. Right.
And then this black guy over here, this is a check valve, or is that just a blowout? Or
that's just a filter. The check valve is, let me see, where check valve is down on the right corner.
Right here.
Right there. That's the check valve right there.
Okay. And that's a good thing to make mention of, is that backflow preventers are legally, they're required in California on any kind of a system that attaches to a water system, but it's always a good safety idea to have a backflow preventer in case somehow you got a reverse pressure, if your water pressure went to zero or something, so that you're not sucking your material back into your water source. So
I think it says that on a lot of the labels too, that it's required to have a backflow.
Yeah, and absolutely good good agricultural practice in terms of safety.
So David, how long did your application with the Mozzie take?
Let's see, off the top of my head, I think it took about 45 minutes to take all the solution out of the bucket, and then you run for another, I think it was like 1.5 to 2 hours to put the quarter to half an inch of water on top of it.
So that's pretty quick.
Yeah, some go quick, some don't. Depends on how many drip emitters you have.
Right.
And how big your plot is, right?
Yeah, how big the plot, yeah.
Right. And then you're also adding clean water after you've sucked up all the mixed test substance into that bucket, right?
Yeah, because it ran for another 1.5 to 2 hours. So as it was doing that, we just rinsed the bucket out and just kept siphoning the water back onto the plot.
Right. Okay.
We did that, a few times. So the bucket was pretty clean after it was done.
Yeah. So any other nuances on the Mozzie that we should pass on to folks?
There's not. It's pretty simple to use as long as you have some kind of like a high pressure irrigation system. And I think you can even use them with a low pressure too, just have a different kind of maisie, but it's mostly just adjusting the pressure in those valves, and they're pretty maintenance free. They usually don't break or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not too many problems with them.
So what kind of pressure was this system running at?
We were at 10 PSI.
Okay, which is actually pretty low pressure, but so you can still get enough differential across the maisie to get it to suck even at 10 PSI.
Yeah, they have like really large ones, and this one's kind of this is the second to the smallest one they make.
Okay.
So depending on what kind of system you have, you would buy a different maisie for, if you had like, you were running at a higher pressure, you'd have a bigger maisie to use.
Yeah, and I would imagine that the larger maisies are more for commercial applications where they're injecting something into a big system or something. But,
yeah, something like that, yes.
Yeah. Because that's a good point as well, is that they come in different sizes. It might work better for a research plot.
Yeah.
Do you have more than one?
We have two. I have the smallest one that we used in greenhouses, and then that one. We have a couple of those.
Excellent. Okay, so this was the SureFlow, right, Julie?
Yes.
And then I think I've got one more slide here, which is this is the Masterflex then. And so in Hawaii, what kind of pressures is this system running on?
I'm not sure what the irrigation pressure. They had a regulator. The drip tape's rated at about 10 PSI. So this particular field, the pressures were a little bit high because it was the lowest point in their whole farm. So they had a little bit of a pressure problem. But I think it was around 10 to 15 at the drip tape.
Okay, and I actually like the use of these trays here.
No, it was dirty. It was just like to stay clean, and we wanted everything level too. That was the other thing.
Oh, well, that makes sense as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So you just keep these batteries charged, or you have them on the station, or how do you deal with making sure that they don't run out?
That battery, we keep it in our field lab, and we have a battery tender on it, so it's always charged. And one battery is plenty. There's enough charge to run this system probably all day.
Okay.
So.
And essentially, this is kind of the exact same mechanics as it's not the same type of pump, but basically you have a pump and you have a mixing container and then a lead into it, and you're sucking it out. And I assume that you did something similar in terms of rinsing that system after you applied the test substance?
Yes, it's a peristaltic pump. So the tubing is squeezed, and the squeezing action, you can adjust the pressure and you can adjust the speed, and that's how you adjust the output. So you can have a consistent output just by dialing in the settings, which is what I liked about it. And the pump draws the solution from the bucket, and then it pumps it into the irrigation line. And then when the bucket's empty, you can completely empty it, and then we triple rinsed it and pumped it into the line.
Yeah. And that's the nice thing about these injection systems, is you know that all that test material has gotten out into the system. So.
Right.
Cool. Okay.
So Julie, how long did your application take?
Took about 40 minutes. Yeah. And we wanted that. We had, I had some recommendations from Bayer for the duration of the application, and also we wanted to match what they do commercially. So we used that information to set the pump to inject at that rate.
And isn't the idea with an insecticide like that, you don't want it to be flushed out too much through the root system, right?
No. So yeah, the application time and the incorporation times were calculated based on recommendations.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's another good point, is to always have an idea of what the intended use is and how it should go on. So, okay, this is just another aside that came up from the study down in India. When this was first set up, the farm crew installed T-tape. And those of you that are familiar with T-tape, this is used in a lot of vegetable crop settings. And the challenge with this is that the tape, it actually exudes water all the way down that line. And there's no way that you can actually catch that water and figure out, is that water being consistently outputted from the line? And so what Nathan had to do at UCR is they had to add a separate line with the individual emitters that he was able to verify the output on those. So it's just something to keep in mind in terms of the actual drip tape in the line. Okay, I thought this was interesting when I looked at your study, Julie. There was quite a bit of boilerplate language in there. And for example, there's the black arrow there. There was a language that said you were supposed to do your speed calibrations.
Right. This is it's a really good example of that. The study directors start with the boilerplate and then they tailor it to your trial. And this trial was really unusual application-wise and sampling-wise. So there was a lot of work done on it in the draft, but we didn't catch everything. And I had never done this type of application before. So it was kind of work in progress during the first field trial. Yeah,
and I also think that we're doing a better job in terms of a general, as a program in whole, in making these drip application protocols make more sense to the actual application. But in this case, you did have speed calibrations, of course, on your broadcast, on your foliar applications. It's just that it doesn't actually fit for the drip irrigation piece of it. So,
right.
And then the other thing I wanted to emphasize on the output verification, there's the output of your whatever injection system you're using. And then there's also, in a sense, the drip system itself is kind of like your spray boom. And there's an aspect of getting that qualified as well. So let's look a little bit how this is an example where you verified your outputs, right, Julie?
Right.
And so this was basically timing how long it took to take a known volume of water out of that bucket, right?
Yeah, because we could have disconnected the tubing from the irrigation line and pumped it into a bucket and just collected the output over time. But we wanted to calibrate it in the system because it's different. It's a different system with it connected versus unconnected.
So this is with your pump actually pushing the solution into the drip lines.
Right. We pressure up the system and connect the injector. So we start with a known volume and then pump for, in this case, we pumped for 60 seconds and then stopped it and then collected the ending volume.
Yeah, and then you repeated that so you basically get a flow per known amount of time.
Right.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, and then this is just using one of the things I thought was interesting is that this is this the one where it's an air blast form, or is this a regular form? Yeah, this is the air blast form, isn't it?
It is. I don't know why it doesn't say it.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, that's an air blast form because it already prompts for initial volume, final volume, and volume discharge. So it was a perfect form for what we were doing.
And this is really just personal choice because you just need to have a format for recording the data.
Right.
Yeah, so, okay. And then And describe a little bit about what you did in terms of checking for leaks.
Okay, so before every application, we performed a leak test, and this was just to make sure that we would get consistent delivery across the field. If there's leaks, then you don't know that your test substance is going to go everywhere. So we had different points in the system where we check. And so this is the procedure we followed, was we'd hook everything up, turn it on, and turn on the pump and start injecting. And then we inspect from the chemigation unit all of the connections that could leak, which is, yeah, basically all of them. Inspect all the connections on the line, and then we go down to the field and inspect all the drip tubing connections. And then we walk the field, and if there's holes in the drip tubing, it usually sprays, so you can detect it pretty easily. So we repair those, and then we check the end of the drip tape to make sure that the closures weren't leaking.
And was this buried drip, Julie, or was it sitting on the surface? Or
it was on the surface, and there was just one line per row. We had in the smaller plots, we had eight lines per plot, so it was doable, not that hard to do.
Yeah. Okay, and I like this documentation. It really delineates exactly what you did.
Well, this is because we don't have an SOP for chemigation. So.
Yeah, so and essentially what you've done is detailed exactly what you did, which looks great. So.
Yeah, and what's also great about that is you put that in the notebook, and if you continue to do these trials after a few times, you get the procedure down, and then you can make an SOP and you have the basis.
Right.
And I like this as well, where you basically had some verbiage here about when you did detect some leaks and how you dealt with it. So.
Did you create this form?
Yeah, I created a lot of forms for this trial because when I get out to the field, it just really helped to have forms that I had to fill the blanks in, because there were so many things to do that were different and not, normal. It wasn't a normal application, and so it helped to have the forms like it helps to have the forms in the field data book when you're making an application. You know that you have to go through and fill everything out to capture everything. So yeah, I did a lot of forms for this trial.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it certainly makes the data easier to review when it's organized like this. We really like it. So
it helped me because I would forget to do everything, so.
Okay, David, I mean, you basically did the same thing, and what I thought was interesting here is you didn't necessarily use the air blast. This is the standard calibration discharge for a boom, but it's
yes.
the same basic gig, right?
Yeah, this is for the output for the mazing, or how fast it drew water.
And so in this case, you were able to get did you just start with a full liter in that bucket and you're able to suck the whole liter out, or did you,
we do it in a 4,000 mil graduated cylinder.
Okay.
I fill it back to 4,000 mils every time, and then we just time how long it takes to draw 1,000 mils out of it.
Oh, so you're watching it as it's dropping.
Yeah, you're just watching it, and when it gets down to, so you start at 4,000, and when it gets down to 3,000, you stop the stopwatch.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great idea, because that way you're not worrying about it sucking air or anything and affecting the flow rate, right?
Yeah, and you have the system all hooked up and running and everything, just like when you're going to do the application.
Yeah, great. Okay, so essentially two different methodologies for getting that same output number. One is visually watching it drop. The other is actually measuring like Julie did. So two completely valid ways of doing the same thing.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Nice. Okay, and then David, you actually checked the drip lines, and how did you guys catch this?
We do the first and last drip emitter. The drip lines are on top of the ground too. And for the strawberry, because it was different because the drip line's buried under plastic.
Okay.
So we had to make the plot bigger so you could catch the drip lines because you can't catch them under the plastic. So say the plot was 100 feet long. We made it like 107 feet long. So you'd have emitters that sticking out of the ends of the plastic to catch.
Oh.
That way you didn't have to actually disturb the plastic within your plot and potentially affect the growth or something.
Well, that and it's almost impossible you'd have to rip the plastic all up, and so we did it that way so you didn't have to tear any plastic.
Yeah. And I mean, the interesting thing here too is that really your catches are remarkably consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the drip tubing's made by machines that are pretty precise, so that's what you would expect, not to be way off.
Yeah. So I guess it's all pressure compensated emitters, so it makes sense that it's a really good company that makes the drip lines that we buy. Yeah. But again, this is documentation that it is being consistently applied. So.
And you created this form.
Yeah, maybe not the best form, but it works for us though.
It works. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes intuitive sense. So. And this is just an example. Nathan did the same thing at UCR, and he hand recorded his catches at the tops of the field and then at the tail ends of the fields. And then because I was there and I was curious, we also just hooked up this is an example of him catching the output with the little weigh boats. And basically we went and got a pressure gauge and popped it into the end of these drip hoses to just kind of get an idea of what was the actual pressures at the ends of his lines. And again, it was very consistent. It was all within like 9 to 11 PSI. So.
And Stephen, you went and bought this pressure gauge and brought it with you?
We did, I just went to an irrigation supply place in Indio, and all you need is this adapter. And this is I got the gauge with this standard 3/4 thread. So, and then you just get an adapter so it'll squeeze into the end of a drip line. So it's just more data to show that the system's working the way you want it to work. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the mix calculations. So Julie, why don't you talk a little bit about how you came up with this 40 gallons per acre? Because this was where it was different than the 20 to 200 whatever mils per plant.
Right. Well, the 20 to 200 mils per plant was, I made that assumption that applied to the soil drench. Okay. So that was kind of a mistake because. And a lesson to always talk to the study director if you're not sure about things. But basically, we wanted to mimic the commercial practice because they're already making these applications regularly. And so I went out with the crew and observed a chemigation with Admire Pro and recorded all of the parameters. And this is the volume that they use. So okay. I wanted to match that, and then I talked to Keith about it, the study director, Keith Dorschner, and it's a decision of what is the overall objective of the trial. Do we want to match the protocol? What's the reasons for the verbiage in the protocol, or are we going for what's commercially the norm? Right. And we kind of decided that that's what we were going for, was the commercial norm.
Yeah, and in this case, so you submitted a deviation, but it's not a deviation of consequence. It's just that the protocol language really didn't match the actual practice.
Right, and it still could be that the volume was applicable to the soil drench, because it would make sense if you were applying to a very small plot and putting the material on a per plant basis.
Right, if you were using some sort of a dipper or something to apply the test substance plant by plant. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Okay, excellent. And then there's the test substance calculations, fairly straightforward, but basically, in this case, there's no overage, right?
No, because the test substance mixture was applied in its entirety from the bucket, and then the bucket was rinsed, so there was no overage.
And in your case, unlike David's, so David, you would have actually calculated for that bigger plot, right? Then because you had the extra drip lines?
Yeah, it's the same thing though. There's no overage.
Yeah, no overage in terms of the mix, but you would have been applying to a larger area than
Yeah,
you
so when I did the calculations, it wasn't the actual plot area used, it was the actual area of the drip lines.
Yeah, exactly. So, and which sometimes happens when we're spraying in other cases, but that's a kind of a unique situation where it's where the drip area is larger than the actual planted area.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. And this is one of your custom forms as well, isn't it, Julie?
Yeah. Yes.
And I still think that we need to have a Julie Coughlin memorial font for IR4 for that perfect handwriting.
Thank you, Stephen.
You have the absolute neatest writing in the program. It's amazing. Okay.
On this day, it was okay, I guess.
Yeah.
Some days it's bad.
And David, these are your application calcs.
Yes.
So basically, again, you have, this was a liquid test substance, right?
Yes, it was.
There it is, the 0.834 pounds per gallon. So, okay, so essentially, and why did you decide to do this in two different mixes?
When I did this the first time, I made a mistake. You have to, it took more than 5 gallons. We had to mix more than 5 gallons, so I split it in half.
Okay. And that's just because your bucket was...
You have to, the Maisie was drawing I think it was drawing too slow. Maybe, it's too fast. If it draws too fast, you have to mix more water to
slow down the amount of time it takes to get it on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the second app I did with this, we only did 1 bucket.
Okay.
I just adjusted it. But that's why we had to do 2.
Okay. I was curious on that, so. Okay, and then, so this was different than Julie's study. You had to actually apply this 1/2 acre inch of water. So this is essentially your calculations for how long you're going to run that system to get that amount of water, right?
Yes. We just calculate how many gallons equals a 1/2 inch. And then based on what the emitters are putting out, it'll tell you how much you need to apply to the plot.
Yeah. And this, again, is excellent documentation that shows that there's a rationale for how long you ran that system that met the requirements of the protocol. Cool. Okay, so application confirmation. One of the things that was interesting is that you guys chose 2 different ways to kind of verify what you did. Again, Julie, this is a great form. I like this. There's your leak test. There's the actual application. There's the rinsing of the bucket. And then there's the flushing of the system. And then you even record the time. So this is excellent. It's very logical and sequential documentation of what happened. And then the next piece is the actual 6J part of the notebook. And so Julie, you just state that the rate confirmation is not applicable because the entire amount of tank mix was applied to the plot.
Right.
And I think that's totally valid, right? Because you've done all the calcs, you know that that was the amount of material that went on, and it's a very simple, straightforward statement that, well, that's how much it was, and it went on to the plot. And then David, you took a little different approach. Let's see. So this was your discharge calibration of the MASI, and then this is how you actually did your calculation. And so essentially this is really just the, because it all went on, it's really just the, however, whatever rounding there was.
Yeah, it's just it's basically 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I threw in a slide here with so I basically did the same thing that David did for both of the studies, whereas, you know, you take the amount of test substance and the plot area, and you compare it against whatever the protocol rate was. And, you know, you essentially, you know, you're getting all of the material on there, and the only difference is a slight rounding error of some sort. So again, 2 different ways to do it and completely valid. Okay, am I moving too fast, or does this make sense?
No, it makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah,
Nika, any other
makes sense.
comments or questions? Or?
Not right now.
Here we go. Okay, so these are just kind of some summary points. Equipment that's appropriate to the conditions, whether or not you need to carry batteries or you have electricity, or if you want to just use the pressure of the system. You may or may not have a poly tank that's available. You need to think about the poly tank if it's had other materials in it and hasn't necessarily been cleaned. You know, that's a risk for contamination. Developing your own forms, the output verification, there's both the device and the drip system, and then the application verification we just chatted about. And, you know, Julie made some great points there about communication with the study director. These are studies that are just by their nature different. And because of that, if there's questions that arise, of course, it's always the study director we need to return back to.
Yeah, and I just like to say, if you haven't done this before, it's a really good idea to do a test just to see how your system output is, how long it's going to take. Maybe there's equipment that you don't have that would be helpful, such as Nathan went and purchased a flow meter, and that was really helpful to him. And then forms. You'll find out when you do a test, oh, you know, it'd be really great if I had a form where I could record this, and that could help with the documentation of the study.
What helps out too is you can go look at everyone's notebooks now.
Yes,
You can start
on our
there as like a
website.
reference.
That's right. And we have these great resources here, David and Julie and our other field research directors who've done this before. Pick up the phone and call. We have contact information on our website, on the Western Region website under the Field Research Centers in our contacts.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate everybody taking some time today to discuss this. We're going to post this up on the website and have it available for future discussions about these more complicated applications. And yes, it's been a wet spring, and the Sacramento Valley is very wet, and everyone is now running and gunning to get things planted because there wasn't any planting earlier in the year. So,
Wow.
okay, I appreciate you guys taking the time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Mika.
Bye-bye in TV land.
Bye, Dave.
Bye. Bye, Julie.